Marcus had never been on a plane before. The thought of flying high above the clouds, watching the world shrink below him, filled him with excitement. His mom had saved up for months to buy his ticket so he could visit his dad in another city. It wasn't just any trip, it was special. Marcus had planned every detail, from the snacks in his backpack to the handheld gaming console he brought to keep himself entertained. At the airport, Marcus felt a little nervous but tried not to show it. He carefully followed every instruction, holding his boarding pass tightly in his hand as he went through security. The officers smiled at him, sensing his nervousness, and one even wished him a safe flight. This small kindness made Marcus feel a little more confident. Once he reached the gate, he noticed all kinds of people around him: families, business travelers, and a group of kids his age heading off on a school trip. Marcus found a corner and sat quietly, his eyes darting around as he observed everything happening. When boarding was announced, his heart raced. He was finally about to fly for the first time. As he stepped onto the plane, he couldn't help but smile. The interior looked even better than he'd imagined. Rows of seats, the overhead bins, and the friendly pilot greeting everyone at the door. It all felt like stepping into a whole new world. Marcus carefully found his seat near the window, excited about watching the sky during the flight. Just as he was settling in, a flight attendant named Miss Carver approached him. She looked strict and serious, her eyes scanning him from head to toe. Marcus immediately tried to make himself smaller, not wanting to draw attention. "Excuse me," she said curtly, "are you traveling alone?" Marcus nodded politely and explained, "Yes, Mom. I'm going to see my dad." Miss Carver didn't smile back. Instead, she frowned when she noticed the gaming console in his lap. "That needs to be off during boarding," she snapped. Marcus quickly apologized and switched it off, feeling a bit embarrassed. But her reaction seemed harsher than necessary. A few passengers nearby gave her puzzled looks but didn't say anything. Marcus tried to ignore the sting of her tone and focused on the view outside the window. Little did he know, this was just the beginning of an experience that would take a surprising turn. Marcus adjusted himself in his seat, trying to shake off the embarrassment from the flight attendant's sharp tone. He told himself it was no big deal and that she was probably just having a bad day. He focused on the view outside the window, imagining how the plane would take off and what the clouds would look like from above. His heart still raced, but this time it was from excitement rather than nerves. The plane was filling up quickly, and Marcus noticed the people around him. A young woman with headphones sat a few rows ahead, and an older man with a newspaper settled in the aisle across from him. Everyone seemed to be getting comfortable, ready for the journey. Marcus pulled out his console, careful not to turn it on this time, just to hold it in his hands. It gave him a sense of calm as he waited for the plane to take off. But then, Miss Carver returned. Her sharp footsteps made Marcus glance up. She stopped at his row, her arms crossed tightly. "I thought I told you to keep that away," she said, her voice louder than before. Marcus blinked in confusion and quickly explained, "It's off, ma'am. I'm not using it. I just—" "You need to follow the rules," she interrupted, cutting him off. Marcus felt his stomach sink as a few passengers turned to look. "Hand it over," she demanded, holding out her hand. Marcus hesitated. "But it's not even on," he said softly, trying not to sound disrespectful. Miss Carver's face grew stern. "Are you arguing with me? This isn't a debate. I'll have to ask you to leave if you can't follow instructions." The words hit Marcus like a slap. Leave? He hadn't done anything wrong. His hand shook slightly as he put the console back in his bag. He looked around, hoping someone might say something, but most people avoided eye contact. A few passengers whispered to each other, clearly uneasy with what was happening. Miss Carver didn't seem satisfied. She stepped back and said loudly, "This passenger is being non-compliant. I'll need security to assist." Marcus froze, his chest tightening. "Wait, no, I'm sorry," he stammered, but it was too late. Two airport staff members appeared moments later, looking confused but professional. "Come with us, son," one of them said gently. Marcus stood up, feeling the weight of everyone's eyes on him. His cheeks burned with shame as he grabbed his bag and followed them off the plane. He didn't understand what he had done wrong, but his excitement was completely replaced by a growing sense of humiliation. Marcus stood alone in the terminal, clutching his backpack tightly. The noise of the busy airport buzzed around him, but it all felt distant, like he was in a bubble of confusion and embarrassment. His eyes stung, but he blinked quickly, refusing to let any tears fall. He didn't want to cry. He didn't want to look weak. But inside, his heart was pounding, and his mind was racing with questions. What had he done wrong? He replayed the moment in his head over and over, trying to figure out why the flight attendant had singled him out. He'd followed the rules, turned off his console, and even apologized. Yet here he was, kicked off the plane like he'd committed some terrible act. The humiliation was overwhelming. Nearby, a few people who had been on the flight walked by. Some avoided his gaze, but others stopped for a moment. A kind-looking older woman with gray hair approached him. "Are you okay, sweetheart?" she asked gently. Her voice was warm, and it made Marcus feel a little less alone. I don't know what happened," Marcus said, his voice shaking slightly. The woman patted his shoulder. "I saw everything," she said, frowning. "You didn't do anything wrong. That flight attendant was completely out of line." Hearing those words brought a small sense of relief, but it didn't fix the situation. Marcus nodded, but he didn't know what to say. The woman looked frustrated, muttering something about how unfair the whole thing was. She took out her phone and said, "I recorded the whole thing. This isn't right. People need to see this." Marcus wasn't sure what she meant, but he didn't have time to ask. Another man approached. A tall, confident man in a suit who had also been on the flight. "Hey, kid," he said, his voice calm but serious. "I saw what happened too. That wasn't right. I'm a lawyer. If you want, I can help." Marcus didn't know how to respond. Everything was happening so fast. He thanked them both quietly, feeling overwhelmed. The man handed him a business card and said, "Call me if you need anything. Don't let this go." Marcus took the card and nodded. He pulled out his phone to call his mom, his hands still shaking. When she answered, he tried to explain, but as soon as she heard the story, her voice rose with anger. "They did what?" she exclaimed. "Stay where you are, Marcus. I'll handle this." As Marcus ended the call, he noticed the older woman typing something on her phone. Within moments, the video of the incident was posted online, and something unexpected was about to happen. Marcus stood there, trying to make sense of everything that had just happened. The terminal around him was busy, with travelers hurrying to catch their flights or heading to the gates. But to Marcus, it felt like the world had slowed down. He couldn't believe he had been kicked off the plane. He felt angry, confused, and embarrassed all at once. It was like the entire experience. Everything he had been looking forward to had been ripped away in just a few minutes. His thoughts were interrupted when he saw the older woman from earlier. She was still typing furiously on her phone, her face serious. She glanced up and noticed Marcus watching her. "Don't worry," she said, her voice reassuring. "I'm posting the video now. People need to see what happened." Marcus felt a knot form in his stomach. The idea of the entire incident being shared online made him uneasy. He hadn't asked for this attention, and he certainly hadn't expected anyone to make a public spectacle of what had happened. But at the same time, something inside him told him that maybe this was for the best. Maybe people would see the truth, and maybe this wasn't just about him anymore. It was about standing up for what was right. The woman gave him a small smile, as if she understood exactly what he was feeling. "Don't worry, sweetie. You've got people on your side." Just as she said that, Marcus's phone buzzed. He pulled it out, and his heart sank when he saw the message from his mom. She was furious. She had called the airline and was demanding an explanation. She told him she was coming to get him, and that she would make sure something was done about this. He knew she was angry, but he also knew she wouldn't stop until something changed. Marcus stood there, feeling a mix of fear and hope. What was going to happen now? He was trying to stay strong, but it was hard. He couldn't help but wonder how this was going to end. Was this going to be the moment that changed everything for him? Would anyone actually listen to him? Meanwhile, the video the older woman had posted was starting to gain traction. Marcus didn't realize how quickly things were changing. In a matter of minutes, his story was shared by dozens of people. Comments began flooding in, people from all over expressing outrage at how he had been treated. Some shared their own stories of discrimination, others offered support, and a few even took the time to praise Marcus for staying calm in such a difficult situation. The video was now circulating faster than Marcus could have ever imagined. Little did he know, his story was just beginning to spread, and the ripple effect of what had happened was only starting to take shape. As Marcus stood there, watching his phone buzz with messages and notifications, he began to feel a sense of something new. It wasn't just anger or confusion anymore. It was something stronger. People were starting to listen. The video that the older woman had posted was quickly being shared, and the comments were pouring in from every direction. Some people were furious about what had happened, while others were shocked that something so unfair could happen on a plane. Marcus had never experienced anything like this before. The phone rang again. It was his mom. This time, her voice sounded different, calm but determined. "Marcus, I'm on my way. Stay right where you are. We'll figure this out." Her voice gave him a small feeling of comfort, but he could hear the worry underneath. He knew she was doing everything she could to fix this, but he couldn't help but feel small. He paced back and forth, unsure of what to do next. People were still walking by, some glancing at him as if they recognized him from the video. His stomach twisted as he imagined what they were thinking. He never wanted to be the center of attention, and now he felt like everyone in the airport was watching him. But despite the fear, there was also a growing sense of empowerment. People were finally starting to see the truth, and it wasn't just his story anymore. It was about standing up against injustice, no matter where it came from. In the meantime, the story continued to spread online. The video had gone viral, and soon news outlets picked it up. Marcus couldn't believe how fast it was happening. It wasn't just his friends and family anymore. It was strangers, too. People from all over the world, sharing their own experiences and showing their support. The more he read, the more he realized this wasn't just a random act. It was part of a bigger problem that needed to be addressed. It didn't take long for the airline to respond. They released a statement saying they were looking into the incident and promised to take appropriate action. But Marcus wasn't convinced. Words were one thing, but actions spoke louder. He was still on edge, waiting to see if anything would really change. His mom arrived a short while later, her face a mix of worry and determination. She took one look at Marcus and pulled him into a tight hug. "We'll get through this," she said, her voice filled with confidence. "You didn't deserve this, and now we're going to make sure they know it." As they walked toward the airline's customer service desk, Marcus couldn't help but feel that something big was happening. He didn't know how it was going to end, but for the first time, he felt like he had a voice, and he wasn't going to let anyone take that away. The journey ahead was uncertain, but one thing was clear: he wasn't going to stand by quietly anymore. This was only the beginning. As Marcus and his mom approached the customer service desk, he could feel his heart racing. There were still so many unknowns. What would the airline do? Would they apologize? Or would they try to sweep the whole thing under the rug? His hands were sweaty, but he kept his head up, determined not to back down. This wasn't just about him anymore. This was about standing up for what was right. The airline employees at the desk looked busy, but when they saw Marcus and his mom walking toward them, their faces changed. There was no more casual chatter or easygoing demeanor. One of them, a man in his mid-30s with dark hair and a neat uniform, stepped forward. "Can I help you?" he asked, but there was an underlying tension in his voice. He must have already seen the video. Marcus's mom spoke first. "We're here to discuss the incident that happened on Flight 309, she said firmly, her voice unwavering. The man's eyes flicked to Marcus for a moment, then back to his mom. He cleared his throat. "Yes, I've been made aware of the situation. We are currently investigating." Marcus wanted to say something, to speak up, and explain his side of the story. But something about the man's tone made him hesitate. It felt like they were trying to distance themselves from what had happened, like they were looking for an easy way out. His mom, however, wasn't having any of it. "No," she said sharply. "You're not investigating. You're listening. My son did nothing wrong, and the way he was treated was unacceptable. If you want to fix this, we need real answers, not just excuses." The man looked momentarily caught off guard, but he quickly composed himself. "I understand you're upset, ma'am, and we'll certainly take this seriously. Please, give us some time to look into the situation." But Marcus could already tell this wasn't going to be resolved with a simple apology. He could feel the frustration building inside him. He had done nothing wrong, and yet here he was, being treated like the problem. His mind flashed back to the way Ms. Carver had spoken to him, how she had dismissed him without a second thought. "Look," Marcus finally spoke up, his voice calm but firm. "I want to know what's being done about this. This isn't just about one incident. It's about how people like me are treated every day. I want to make sure no one else has to go through this." The airline employee looked at him, his expression softening just a little. "We'll review everything, sir," he said, his tone now less defensive. "We'll reach out to you once we have more information." Marcus nodded, but he wasn't satisfied. He knew this wasn't over. The battle for justice had just begun. As they walked away from the counter, Marcus felt a new sense of strength. No matter what happened, he was going to make sure his voice was heard. This wasn't just about getting back on the plane. It was about standing up for his dignity, and for anyone else who had ever been treated unfairly. Marcus and his mom left the airline's customer service desk, but the weight of everything that had happened still hung over him. The conversation had been polite, even respectful, but Marcus knew it wasn't over. The employee had promised to investigate, but promises were easy. What mattered now was what the airline would actually do. He couldn't shake the feeling that it was all just part of the usual routine. Say the right words, make the complaint go away, and hope the attention fades. But Marcus wasn't going to let it fade. As they walked through the airport, Marcus's phone buzzed again. This time, it wasn't just a message from his mom. The video from the airport had gone viral, and his phone was blowing up with notifications. His heart skipped a beat as he saw that people were still sharing their outrage and support. The video now had thousands of views, and the comments were pouring in faster than he could read them. "People are still talking about it," his mom said as she looked over his shoulder. "You've really started something here, Marcus. You've got a lot of people on your side." Marcus was surprised by how quickly things had escalated. When he'd first stepped off the plane, all he'd wanted was to get to his destination. He hadn't expected any of this. The attention, the video, the flood of support. But now, it felt like there was no turning back. In a way, it was empowering. The people who had shared their own stories of discrimination, the messages of encouragement, and the demand for accountability were all coming together. But as much as the support felt good, Marcus also felt the pressure. He knew that standing up for what was right came with consequences. Some people would praise him, but others would criticize him. The road ahead wouldn't be easy. He understood now that this wasn't just about one flight attendant. It was about something bigger, something that reached far beyond him. That evening, after they returned home, Marcus sat down at his computer, thinking about the next steps. His mom was already making plans to contact the lawyer the man from the airport had mentioned earlier. She was determined to keep fighting, and Marcus felt a spark of hope. He wasn't alone in this anymore. His mom was by his side, and he had the support of people all over the world who had seen the video and heard his story. The next morning, The news outlets picked up the story, and that's when things really began to change. The airline issued an apology, but it felt empty. People weren't satisfied with just words. They wanted to see real change. The pressure on the company grew stronger, and soon it became clear that they had to take action. For Marcus, the journey wasn't over yet, but one thing was certain. His voice had been heard, and he wasn't going to stop until it made a difference. As he sat back and looked at the messages from people around the world, he realized that this was only the beginning of a much bigger fight for justice.